This webinar is jointly hosted by Progressive Multiplier Fund, a 501c3 organization, and Progressive Multiplier Action Fund, a 501c4 organization. The discussion includes 501c4 and multi-entity resourcing strategies.
Welcome to everyone to Evolving Beyond Early Fundraising, Early Funding, Resourcing Power and the Fate of Our Democracy. We had a tremendous registration response to this webinar, so I thank you for making time in your busy schedules, especially for those of you on the ground who had elections this week. My name is Bethany Mackey. She, her pronouns, joining you from the unceded territory of the Tocobaga people in what we now know as St. Petersburg, Florida. As we move our way through this discussion, please use the Q&A. Unfortunately, we cannot enable chat on a webinar of this size. So please use the Q&A. I am trying to keep an eye as people come in and unmute them, or so that everybody has the ability to raise a hand and ask a question. So let's get into it. I'm thrilled to see so many of our movement group partners and our funding partners in the audience today. For those of you who haven't met Progressive Multiplier, our purpose is to radically shift the progressive movement towards scale, self-determination, and sustainability by creating high-leverage investment opportunities for those who want to strengthen the independent financial position of movement groups. So in 2017, a group of progressive thought leaders came together to explore what nonprofits needed to scale revenue generation and become more self-sustaining. And at the conclusion of that exploration, Bill Radford, our founding ED, was asked by Rob Stein of the Democracy Alliance to start Progressive Multiplier and solve for what their research found. Found four main things. Small and mid-sized groups often don't know where to start earning revenue beyond institutional philanthropy, and they need basic revenue generation training and supporting infrastructure. Some mid-sized and larger groups are running revenue generation projects, but they lack adequate funding to grow these efforts. And then financing, like loans to scale really successful RevGen programs, is practically non-existent. So for large programs, like some of the ones that you have on the panel today, that means millions in revenue is going unrecognized. And that revenue generation successes aren't widely shared and adopted, leaving collective learning unharnessed for the progressive movement. So in 2018, Progressive Multiplier launched as a funding intermediary to support independent revenue generation programs in nonprofits focused on achieving justice, restoring the environment, and realizing democracy. Our program has evolved to include training, technical assistance, grant making, and our online innovation exchange, where we are building a shared body of knowledge and a community of practice around progressive revenue generation. Back in January, as our Realizing Democracy grantee partners were recovering from the 2022 election cycle, one in which the money came in too late and C4 money was way too hard to raise, one of them said to me, "We're fighting and voting from a place of survival, but we're relegated to being a cute BIPOC pass-through for funders and reduced to a mathematical equation of cost per vote to them." Let's think it for a minute. That statement said more to me about the work Progressive Multiplier should be doing than any paper or article I'd read, or conference session I'd sat in on the evils of boom and bust funding democracy groups. It also made me think of something that one of today's panelists told me about what revenue generation meant to her organization's agenda to advance social, racial, and economic justice through democracy. So when Alex and I were chatting about Lucha's RevGen project when they were a Progressive Multiplier grantee, she said, "This is one big experiment, and independent revenue generation is allowing us to build an agenda to thrive, while a lot of our funding focuses on how to defend." So the twofold path for resourcing democracy groups authentically has become very clear to us through our conversations with our grantee partners. Fund year-round and fund the full spectrum of democracy work that organizing groups are doing beyond building electoral power, and help those groups become less reliant on funding that accrues power for anyone but the people they organize with and for. So with us today to examine the barriers to and the solutions for resourcing progressive power building in this way, four amazing individuals. I am thrilled and great to be part of this conversation. So our first panelist is Prentice Haney, a community organizer and co-executive director of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative. Prentice is nationally recognized, and after Tuesday even so, for successfully implementing democracy, civic engagement, and racial justice advocacy programs in Ohio and the Midwest. Prentice also serves on the board here at Progressive Multiplier Fund and Action Fund, bringing to our work the perspective of one of the most innovative and diversified revenue generation programs in the country. Prentice is also the author of my favorite post from 2 nights ago. Organizers build electorates and cultivate human agency. We show people that democracy matters through participation, no matter the barriers. That's what organizers do. Welcome, Prentice.
Thank you.
Our second panelist today is Alex Gomez, Executive Director of Lucha and ACE. Rooted in her family's immigration struggle, Alex is a lifelong organizer who has dedicated her life to social justice and community empowerment through grassroots mobilization. Alex brings a wide lens perspective to this conversation, given both the local and national organizing roles she served, and is one of the most influential people in Arizona who is investing in new leadership that is changing the political landscape there. Lucha is a grantee alum here at PMF, and Alex is always a very willing partner to our team. So welcome, Alex. Our final movement group voice on the panel today is Evan Milligan, Executive Director of Alabama Forward, a statewide civic engagement table with 30+ member organizations spreading pro-democracy values to every corner of the Deep South, which, as he said, is not the easiest place to work on pro-democracy work. Evan and his team are current Progressive Multiplier Fund grantees and are working with our team on their Shape the Field program, which educates and implores Alabamians to embrace civic engagement and become active members in Alabama's artistic and cultural communities. Evan was also the named plaintiff in Allen versus Milligan, a case that resulted in a historic U.S. Supreme Court ruling that Alabama's new congressional district map violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting votes of Black residents. Evan. We also have 2 funder partners joining us on the panel today as well. Julie Fernandez is the Associate Director for Democracy at the Rockefeller Family Fund, where she is Managing Director of the Democracy and Power Innovation Fund. This is a partnership between state-based organizing groups, social science researchers, and aligned funders in support of learning and innovative programs that explore the connections between organizing, civic engagement, and building progressive power, with a focus on work in and led by communities of color. Prior to joining the Rockefeller Family Fund, Julie has held roles over the last 20 years in philanthropy, presidential administrations, and nonprofits fighting for democracy and civil rights. Welcome, Julie. And last, as a community organizer, Christian minister, program officer, and business owner, Jason Garrett has a track record of working deeply in and with civic organizations, faith communities, government, and the for-profit sector. He's currently a program officer in civic engagement in government US at the Ford Foundation. His grant-making focuses on the national infrastructure and critical capacities needed to foster civic engagement and a more equitable democracy. And he includes support for national community organizing, infrastructure, a range of capacity building efforts, and engagement with public sector officials and for more direct democracy practices. Jason is our program officer here at Progressive Multiplier Fund and has been with us through every step of our evolution in supporting movement groups capacity building with our programs. Jason. All right, let's get into this. I'm going to take the screen down so we can see everybody's beautiful faces. All right, my first question is for Prentice. Ohio was, of course, closely watched on Tuesday because of issue 1. Because of the votes turned out by progressive movement groups like OCC, Ohioans have now enshrined in the state constitution an individual right to one's own reproductive medical treatment, including but not limited to abortion. You once told me that election day is just this one piece that creates the conditions for building power. The communities organized have achieved electoral power, and it was backed in part by donors and funders who invested in building that electoral power. What's the next piece of power building, and what resource do you need to build it?
Yes. Well, thank you for that. You are really good at keeping notes and things I've said. I don't even know the things I say sometimes.
I listen, Prentice.
Well, for one, I just want people to clap it up for the enshrining abortion rights in Ohio. Just clap it up for that for a hot second. Let's just thank everyone who worked tirelessly for that. So I'll say a couple of things now. Answer your question. You don't have a night like what we had in Ohio without years of infrastructure building on the ground. Let me talk about what infrastructure I mean. I remember one time Jason, he had came to Ohio, maybe it was like 2018. We was at Crossroads Church, and we were talking about building vehicles of belonging and about how strong vehicles of belonging create the conditions where people can take actions together. And so one of the things that's so important about infrastructure, we have to have strong vehicles of belonging that help people learn how to practice democracy together. So that's what grassroots organizing comes in. The other part of infrastructure, you have to have flexible resources to take risky bets. And so those two pieces of the infrastructure really created the conditions for election night this week. So one, OOC, we have 4 vehicles of belonging for our memberships in the state of Ohio. We have a vehicle belonging for Black churches and people of faith, for workers who are mostly women of color or childcare providers, for students and young people, and for formerly incarcerated persons who are coming home, restoring their own agency and dignity and becoming full citizens again. So we are creating and cultivating human agency in those vehicles every day, where people are learning, some of which for the first time, how to practice democracy together every day. That work happens 365. And then there are moments, political moments, where we have to test our power. And because the second piece of infrastructure, we have flexible resources because of the 7 years of independent resource generation we've done, where we've been able to generate hundreds of thousands of dollars of profit that's gone back into our movement. When Republicans try to stop abortion from getting on the ballot by putting on an August special election that cost $22 million, and they tried to raise the threshold for direct democracy, we didn't have to wait for funders to decide if it was time to go on that. We executed $600,000 of our own money that we got from our own independent resource generation to start a field program. We were the first ones out on the ground the day after that vote, and we're knocking the doors, and we've been on the ground since then. And now, yes, we know money and resources have flowed in for the things. Thank you. We needed that, but we would have never been ready with our vehicles of belonging, our field, and our flexible resources if we did not have our own independent revenue generation operations for the last couple of years for a moment such as this. That's the kind of thing that people don't know. They think that like we kind of woke up one day and like got into the fight, but we actually were preparing for a moment where we had to take a bet on ourselves. So we took a bet on ourselves, and it paid off. And part of what we're going to see happen, the power and the resources we need next, is now we are going into 2024, where we need even more infrastructure, even more resources. And we're in a position right now where we can continue to generate our own revenue, not enough to win in the state, but to have the sort of the ability to take the risk we need to take for the kind of wins we need to have. And then the other piece is that around the power we need, Black voters in Ohio are still disenfranchised. They're still being disinvested in. Yes, the organization is doing a lot to move them, but we are still behind the 8 ball in terms of their perception of their own political power. We have to increase that if we're going to be able to compete in a competitive, fair election next year. And so part of what we're doing is making sure that we continue to do the organizing, the power building to raise the political salience of issues that matter to Black voters, but also raise their political power, while also doing the good program we know how to do to win and generating the revenue from the projects we have, so that we have the ability to take the risk that even when funding is not there yet, we can take those risks. Because guess what? Risk takers create opportunities to win. And when you take those big risks like we took this year, we see what happens. And people want to jump on with folks who got good ideas to win. So that's a couple things I'll say for now.
Awesome. Thanks, Prentice. I appreciate that. So Alex, as a leader of a group that similarly turned out voters that ultimately elected Regina Romero in Tucson, as well as Lane Santa Cruz to the city council there, are you aligned with what Prentice has said about the risk-taking and creating the vehicles for agency and the being ready? How does that resonate with what you're seeing in Arizona and your experience?
Yes, absolutely. Not only am I aligned, but I wish this whole segment was just on what Ohio did. That's actually all I want to like listen to. Even though I'm, really excited to be on a really extraordinary panel, and this really important conversation. And thinking about the magnitude of what happened in Ohio, I'm definitely all in my feels because I'm thinking of my little luchadores that are coming up in Arizona that are part of the organization, that are the next generation, that are 3 and 6, like Aaliyah and Ivy, who are part of our membership, and they have less rights. And folks like Prentice and Molly and so many others in Ohio are fighting for them. But the magnitude of where we are at in this conversation is incredibly difficult, because what we're witnessing is states fighting back, states creating agency and belonging when the right is lashing out at our communities, and creating and contesting at levels that are in the billions of dollars. And we're questioning our operations, we're questioning grassroots organizing, we're questioning at the state-based level if it's the right time to go. If it's the right time, if we should run ballot measures like this, will they win? Questioning whether Ohio should go, and the fact that Ohio had to generate its own revenue to be able to run at that level is a testament of how the right is really operating at big bets. Well, we're taking very small bets, but it's the grassroots organizations that are punching above our weight class, creating moonshots and winning. And so similarly, in our race in Arizona, we had to invest our own dollars within Lucha to garner attention for this race, because folks felt that, she was fine, that everything was going to be okay, but not understanding that the right has been targeting, they have been organizing, and the digital media, the disinformation and misinformation has not stopped for an entire year. And so what we are doing in Arizona is, quite frankly, following the model and the lead of Ohio. And so we're very fortunate to be in relationship and with the support of Ohio, really building our own revenue field model in preparation for next year. Because we really feel that if we're going to dismantle all of the attacks and what the right has created, that it's going to take year-round grassroots organizing to be at the helm and at the lead of that fight, because we demonstrate that when we do it with our communities' voices at the center of the conversation, and with people that have everything at risk but put everything on the line to save democracy, that we actually do win. And so we're really excited to be able to next year launch our field vendor with the support of Ohio, and also our operations hub. And so the hope is that what we're not just generating revenue, we're transforming our democracy through these new vehicles, because we're going to be able to contest at different levels to be able to dismantle what the right has been building.
So Alex, I feel like we need to do a follow-up conversation just on the Operations Hub. We have several grantees that are working on Operations Hub like projects and the field vendor. So for all of the hardcore fundraisers on the phone, we promise we will follow up with nitty-gritty details on all of that in the coming months. Evan, I want to pull you into this conversation sitting in the Deep South, which is far away from Ohio and Arizona's swing state status. Alexander thought we'd actually say that in a phrase, which is exciting. Evan, you've been really vocal that supporting democracy means supporting far more than voting, both for the people you serve and the funders of your work. So since voter efficiency isn't necessarily the issue for you the way it is for your colleagues in the panel, How is Alabama Forward funded in ways that do and don't support the full breadth of democratic practice that you want to see your community engage in?
Thank you, Bethany, and thanks for allowing us to participate. Greetings to all of the panelists and those that joined. For us in Alabama, just in terms of the math here, we have about 5 million people, uh, about, I would say 3.68, roughly a little bit south of 4 million are registered to vote now, right? So the registration issue is less the issue here. We we have many adults who have found at least some outlet to register. The issue in Alabama is turnout, which is a little different, I think, than in some states. You have a constant influx of younger people, folks moving to the state. Our population growth here has been pretty flat, at least for my lifetime, and since 1970. We just reached 5 million. In contrast, Georgia was at 5 million people in 1970. So for us, if we look at, let's say, the 2020 election, the 2022 election, for example, there were about 62% of registered voters who turned out, and that was one of the highest recorded turnouts for president for generally speaking, but low for a presidential election, even still. And then during the midterm, we only had about 1.4 million of those voters of that 3.68 actually turn out. So that's about 38.5%. So in 2020, we're at 62. The midterm, we're at 38.5%. So, in one of the most marketed elections, 2020, we still were not at 70%. And then certainly at a non-presidential year to fall off like that, that was one of the lowest voter turnouts in 30 years, 36 years, I believe. Now, Alabama Forward was founded in the fall, like October of 2020. So these are metrics that when we go to funders who are supporting civic engagement groups and they want to ask, well, what have you done? It takes a lot to impact a statewide election cycle where you haven't had a competitive race in 10 years. If we're coming in with a less than $1 million budget and it's been less than 2 years of full operational growth to actually have an impact on that. But that's a real question for investors to ask, because anyone who pays someone or supports someone wants to know what their ROI is. And so what we were looking at is, okay, we already have a narrative and a framework about Alabama that can be complicated if we're doing social movement building. So we have people who want to advocate for any of the issues that folks on this call are concerned about and are doing it in a place that historically has been, the hostility towards those goals is well associated with the brand of Alabama. So you have people who then want to leave the state and go elsewhere, or if you are an Alabamian, you sort of resign yourself to a degree of failure or disempowerment. And you can't build a social movement on that type of identity. And it gets reinforced when we go and then say, hey, we're trying to establish this network. And they say, okay, what was your impact on the statewide election the year you were founded or 2 years after you were founded? And what we've tried to do is to really reframe where we're starting the conversation. And so to say, all right, we have members, we're building scaffolding to yield some outcomes incrementally over the next 10 years, but we're hoping for the payoff some of these investors want. That might be 7 years out. We have to be able to have, as a coalition, identities that celebrate the work people are already doing and the growth that's already happening on the ground. Our canvassers in our member networks are often, if there's a pandemic, those are the same people registering people to vote are the folks that are going out doing that contact tracing. They're the folks that are doing the mentorship. They're doing mental health awareness. They're doing community-based violence intervention and prevention. and they themselves are often working just above certain wages, and their family members certainly are exposed to all the vulnerabilities that they're exposed to. And so we have to have a culture and a way of recognizing the work that they're doing leading up to the sort of electoral gains that everyone wants. And we've found that our funders have been have really embraced, for the most part, the way that we want to reframe civic engagement as an act of caregiving in Alabama. We have many people who are investing care in their community as artists, as educators, as maintenance workers, as labor organizers. If we can recognize all of that work as playing a role in getting us closer towards the tipping point of maintaining relevancy in our communities as credible messengers, and certainly building the infrastructure that can track our engagement and help us understand with more specificity where our coverage gaps are, then we're able to affirm the work that we're doing, but also hold ourselves accountable to numbers. For our budget, uh, we're still top heavy on philanthropic foundations. But what we're trying to do is to really build a solid 15% of our budget that comes from branded item sales, fundraising events, individual contributions, program revenue, so that we can grow that over time. And then in doing that work, we're investing in relationships that are year-round sorts of relationships, where the return on that investment. We're working with local vendors, artists, et cetera. Those are relationships that continue to pay a dividend in terms of the ecosystem we're building, whether the conversation is about elections or other aspects of civic engagement. And so, reaching that 15%, we're not there yet. This is really the first full year that we've tried to run some of those programs, but we have, through partnership with Progressive Multiplier and others, have had at least a window to begin innovating those strategies, and I'm looking forward to learning more about doing that.
Thanks, Evan. And if you have not checked out, for our audience members, Shape the Field, which is Alabama Forward's platform, all kinds of amazing merch, music, art, engagement opportunities. It is one of the more creative RevGen platforms that we have seen in our 5 years. So we're the Transparency partner with Alabama Forward. All three of you really have some of the more innovative, I would say, cutting edge revenue generation approaches. Prentice, one of the reasons we had reached out to you originally to be on the board was around the field organizing structure and things like the brewery. And Alex, I know when Lucha came to us for a grant, it was around standing up a school to create a stream of revenue from the state, and a per student charter revenue. And then Evan with Shape the Field. It takes a level of courage and creativity, and I think audacity in the best way to operate at the level the three of you do when it comes to sustaining your daily organizing operations and almost this entirely separate piece and body of work to feed the mission work. What was the demand on your capacity like to stand up these efforts, and what did you actually need? What should that support have looked like to get you there farther faster? You're obviously all in, if we look at Ohio as furthest along in this continuum of diversifying revenue, and Alabama Forward just did that sort of almost 1 2 year in starting point of trying to get to that magic 90-10 split or 85-15 split of philanthropic revenue. What did you need that you didn't have? I open that up to the three of you.
I would say that the thing that we needed in the beginning was talent. So to do this sort of work, you have to have an ecosystem of talented leaders who can lead in different arenas. You're not going to be able to do independent revenue generation operations if you don't have talented back office leadership and talented field leadership and political consulting leadership or social entrepreneurship. And I actually believe that the best entrepreneurs are organizers, because organizers build things that don't exist. And so we look into our organizations and we look at the talent there, and instead of having a very small-minded idea about leadership, that like, oh, we need to run these very small nonprofit C3s, we see all the legal entities that the tax code offers us as an opportunity to put all of the different leaders that we have in those different spaces around an aligned plan. So for us, in the beginning, it was really just about how do we literally had a retreat about like, how do we leverage the leadership of these set of 5 people? And that meant that like some people moved to an LLC, some people did, other people had political missions they needed to go accomplish. And I think that more state leaders need the space to see their talent pool and be like, how can we put people on deployment to do a set of things and move through fluid structures to do that. And then connected to that is that the only way we were able to do that is that we took a bet and we paid for our leaders who were doing risky social ventures to have time to learn how to do it, like fellowships, to have some things to pay for their kids and childcare, things like that, so they can take those risks. So you need flexible resources for folks to take those risks, to build those ventures, and then you need the talent and the table that in the flexible leadership structure for them to move around.
Yeah, Prentice, that is the number one thing we hear from our grantee partners, that they want revenue to be able to be more flexible with their staff to support them in their development to do exactly this, that kind of evolution that you're talking about. Alex and Evan, what about you all? What did you need? Or do you need?
For us, launching the Escuelitas was going to be a massive experiment. It was going to be the first time that our Servicios department was going to expand beyond providing citizenship and also rights restoration and English classes. And so we needed flexible funds to be able to experiment with folks that knew how to build curriculum, also do membership engagement work, that didn't have to do with going canvassing door to door and asking for $5, right? It was a different type where we were now educating communities and also engaging communities on a mission, vision, and North Star for change, where they are the change makers in the community. And so what we have found is that to Prentice's point, being able to find the talent around us and then sometimes outside of us, being able to bring on folks that, are outside of our network, but are value aligned and want to be a part of something bigger and contribute to the movement, to layer in additionally being able to leave behind their talent and coach our communities to be able to retain and build. So there's also a level of flexible funding to be able to create tiers for learning so that our leaders can be able to learn and grow with those experts and develop those skills themselves.
For us, I think we actually benefited from work that, it was being done by people on the panel in their respective states, certainly by state voices, and just lots of groups that had sort of anticipated the moment in American history where we would see this collaborative civic engagement model even get established and take root in the Deep South. Because I don't think it was by chance that, we're one of the last regions to come online. There are some really significant structural barriers. And just in my observation of the industrial side of social change work over time, I've noticed that there's this tension between utilizing local talent and prioritizing local human resources and local personnel who are going to come in the door sometimes, not often, with less of the credentials associated with working at a certain tempo and scale, certainly with startup organizations, and really having the audacity and the boldness to call a shot and sell that vision. We might find fewer people locally who have those skills, but they have all of the cultural uh, relationships and the street cred. And then you have that tension to work with folks who have all of those skills and national relationships, but don't have a sense of what I was saying around the importance of Alabama folks achieving their own liberation to undercut this narrative of inferiority. So there's this tension there. And the only time, the times I've seen people really achieve a balance is when there's some type of celebrity status. I saw this happen with Tarana Burke, with Latasha Brown, with Brian Stevenson, with other folks that I've known for years who they were working at the same level. The work was amazing. But when they were able to speak at a certain event, or then everyone else heard it. And now they're like, okay, the MBAs and the PA, how can we help you? I just want to donate some time. And I've thought a lot about, how we navigate that, because that achieving or experiencing that type of celebrity has destabilizing impacts. There's pluses and minuses to that, and that's not a copy and paste sort of solution. And so I don't really know what we could have been given. I think it's just we were given a lot of affirmation that you're going to have to go through this struggle to find a balance that makes sense for you all. And I think we were fortunate to have a certain degree of understanding. Maybe more understanding and patience could have been helpful as well, but I feel like we got a lot of it. So
And most valuable is actually just having space with your peers who have been down this road, um, and having investment in holding those spaces. And it sounds like you are completely in line with that as well. And I'm gonna put our funder partners, not in the hot seat, but in the spotlight for sure. So Julie, I love what you said at the top of the call about folks like Alex and Prentice who are part of the DPI fund, being your teachers. That has very much been our experience with our granting partners. That we exist with and for them and because of them. And they are our best partners. We're getting better every day at the work. So the Democracy and Power Innovation Fund is partnering with state-based groups like the ones your fellow panelists are leading to really explore the connections between organizing, civic engagement, and building progressive power, especially in communities of color or work done by leaders of color. And you really want funders to align around this new paradigm of how do we support full spectrum democratic practice and get beyond early funding, getting beyond the cost per vote metrics. And when we asked for questions on the registration for the webinar, somebody actually asked, how can we reimagine the metrics for success beyond voter registration and turnout and cost per vote? So what does it look like, Julie?
Okay, so I feel like I have so much from that I've just heard from Prentice and Alex and Evan that I kind of, it's just really gotten me, as usual with this crowd, thinking and expanding my thinking, and so grateful to be in this space. But I'll try and see if I can answer your question, Brittany. Okay, so I love the fact that you title this Beyond Early Funding, in part because I think there's no such thing as early funding in the work to build democratic practice. What is early? The whole early funding frame means that we're all keyed towards some date in November, right? So it's early to that. But everything Prentice and Alex and Evan have been talking about says that while elections matter, our work is not about elections because they don't, we have a lot to work on in our movement around what is our goal. What is the actual goal of our enterprise? Our goal can't be winning an election, because there's one thing I've learned over the many years of doing work like this is that elections aren't power. Elections aren't change. Winning an election does not mean, friends, that people are going to be able to win and hold wins. It doesn't mean that. So it can't be our actual goal. What is our actual goal? And this is where I think, unfortunately, sometimes we do have divergence. Even when you get beyond the elections are not the goal. What I think the goal is democratic practice, meaning that regular folks in communities have the ability to win what they want to win to improve the lives of themselves and their families and their communities. That it actually is the material change, the realization of material change driven by what actual people want. Now, the reason I say there's divergence is that I do think that for some people in our movement, and I'll say broadly for the progressive movement, when you ask them what the goal is, they'll name an issue. I'm a climate funder. I'm a abortion rights funder. I'm a racial justice funder, whatever. Love it all. But it's a funders setting an agenda about what issues they want to win. That's not democratic practice. That's something else. So part of the paradigm shift that I'm trying to drive in the work with the leadership of Alex and Prentice and others in the DPI, we're trying to get folks to see that one of the paradigm shifts we're trying to achieve is understanding whose power we're talking about building and for what. It's not as we're not working for a system to make me more powerful. I'm just like one middle-aged lady living in the suburbs, okay? It's about making everyday people in community having power. So we have set out in DPI to try to work with a set of groups, as you said, to kind of interrogate how we understand what power is, how it is built, how it moves, and what the impact is. Because that's what we want to measure. So the industry, to the question around how can we imagine metrics for success, whatever, it gets back to what is success? What is success? If success is organizations having power to win policy, electoral, or ideological fights, let's measure that. We measure whether or not organizations are, and I shouldn't even say we, let me take a step back. Who's measuring? We see our goal is supporting organizations in their ability to measure their practice so that they can see whether their strategies are showing up in the way they want them to in their definition of winning, because they're the protagonists in the story. So we have worked with groups over time to help the organizations understand the power that they're currently building, their collective capacities to wield power, and the impact that power is having in their states, in their ecosystems. So then they can say, oh, I understand how my power is showing up. I understand where it's not. And then I can make strategic choices to improve those outcomes. So we're very rooted in always being mindful of who's the protagonist in this story. So we have a program that we're in the 4th year of supporting a set of groups around the country in their ability to collect and analyze data that helps them see their organizations, their strategy, and their power. So we have given resources to a bunch of groups for them to, all of them have used it to increase their capacity to learn. We're kind of working with groups to become more of learning organizations, which all of them are craving to be, but giving them the capacity to be learning organizations, more capacity. And then we have, with all of these groups, they have been on a journey to figure out what data are they currently collecting? What does it look like? When I analyze what I know, what do I see? What data could I be collecting that helps tell a richer story or a deeper story? So the groups have been able to kind of see their program. And then what we've tried to figure out is then within the areas of base building, developing co-strategizing, solidarity, collective action, and then the impact that this work has. And I think I want to say a key part of some of this work, just because it was so resonant with me, is when Prentice, you talk about building vehicles of belonging. So we're trying to understand, and we have some parallel research around, we call it political homes, but it's the same idea, sort of what is it that makes people come together and feel like they belong to something? So that then if you feel like you belong to something, then you're willing to take risks and to lean in and to say, okay, I'm in it. What are we doing? And then when you have a sense of belonging and a sense of collective, we can try and do something together. When you fail, which you will, because we all fail all the time in everything we do, you see your work in the context of the bigger thing you're building together. And also, you don't always need it to be your issue. I'm in it with we have belonging. We're in it together. So we're fighting for this today. We're fighting for that tomorrow. And we're measuring our success on how well is our base building going? How many people are we in solidarity with? How are we increasing our sense of belonging? The power, how are we increasing our actual power to influence the ideology around issues? We try and measure all this stuff. I have to say, we're real nerdy over here at the DPI Fund. We try and measure everything. We are working with groups to measure every aspect of their work. And starting with the questions they have about their program around, how do we understand a person's sense of their own power? Let me just say a plug for this. We do a bunch of work on narrative, political identity, and values within the Black community. We've done some in the Latino community, which we're going to do more this coming year, and starting an AAPI project. Because what we know is that we don't have enough curiosity and understanding about the diversity of values and perspectives within non-white communities. I mean, we're endlessly curious about white people. I'm all for white people, but like, we are very diverse and interesting too. And so to understand our communities at that same level, so that we can kind of tap into people's feelings and their emotion that they bring to politics. I don't want to keep going. There's so much here. And I want to say one last thing about what you said, Evan, about Alabama folks driving their own liberation. I just have a t-shirt that says that. Because if folks aren't driving their own liberation, if they're not the hero of the story, if they're not the protagonist, if they're not the agent, then they're playing your game, and your game is not winning for them. So why are they playing? And it's hard, I know, speaking to my funder colleagues, but it's hard sometimes for funders to say, and you also have this in your stuff, we need to be unafraid of organizations accruing power, because it's not, we don't need more power. I don't need more power. We have to be unafraid of saying, it's their power that I'm trying to help them build, so that they can help us build the happy country where we all want to live. And I trust Prentice, Alex, and Evan to be the drivers of the happy country that I want to live in. So that's it.
Thank you. I saw Evan say, wow. That's just, what you said is just profound. And I hope that all of the funder colleagues that we have on the phone want to engage in this conversation in a continual way to say, how can we shift this? And how can we shift our practice, and how you invest in funding intermediaries to work with groups like the three here on the phone. Jason, I know that organizing within the funder community around how do we support organizing groups, how do we support full spectrum democratic practice is a key piece of your work within the CDG US portfolio. But I also know that you've certainly seen barriers to that one of our audience members wrote in not so much a question, but a statement of the community accountable organizing and its effect on electoral practices certainly reached proof of concept in terms of national impact in 2020 and again in 2022. So how do investment strategies need to evolve to be reflective of this concept and what we see organizing groups like the Three on the Phone achieving every day?
And Julie, appreciate it. Always hard going after Julie. Let me just continue to praise Evan, Alex, and Prentice. You know, I talk with my kids each night, and we talk about our day. I'm going to talk to them about you all. I'm going to talk to them about the work that's being done across this country. That's the part of the political education every night that goes on in home. So the question around like how do investment strategies evolve to support you all in the way you need to be supported, and I think that question is important. But I think we have to ask another question before that, and Julie touched on some of this. It's around why are the current investment strategies that way? What is the diagnosis that people have that is leading them to do that? Do funders, for instance, believe that participation is sufficient? It's enough that people vote and come out and they speak up at meetings, and it's a matter of their ability to be able to participate, and that's what's going to get us to where we need to go? Or do you think that we have to pair participation with power, the ability to achieve a purpose, the ability to do things like Julie said, that to fulfill the desires that are shared in that community? Which one? Do you believe in efficient, short-term technocratic solutions where facts and expertise will fix our way into stronger democracy? Or do you believe in the complexity of the problems and how they require adaptive solutions and strategies with people affected by those challenges who need to be at the center of it? And that we together, we need to be engaging and learning and experimenting and building long-term strategies. What do you believe that's guiding your funding? I'm a C3 funder, but for C4 folks, do you believe that a representative government, the right people elected, they'll get us to where we want to go? They'll reflect the will of the people? Or do you believe that racialized capitalism has led to the design of a government system that is constantly set up to fail and to minimize the role of public goods and to prioritize individualism and concentrate power in the hands of a few? What do you believe that's shaping why you fund? There are a number that's the first thing I would say is the diagnosis. There are a number of other things I would say, and I think Julie covered a lot, but I would encourage grantees to really dig in on what's the diagnosis of the funders that's leading them to do what they're trying to do, and help do the political education as well along the way. There are a number of other things I could say, but I would say, maybe the second thing I would say is investing in people over policies and processes. And what do I mean by that? Well, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about a hypothetical scenario I would like to run by you all. Let's say that your funder, you have $20 million, and you are absolutely guaranteed one of the following two outcomes. Absolutely guaranteed it's going to happen. $20 million. Number one, you can invest in a meaningful policy solution, housing, health, immigration, whatever you want, and it will move forward, and it will provide benefits to 10 million people, about the size of Michigan. And don't worry about the amount, the benefits will be significant. It will have a significant impact on their lives. Option number one. Option number two, you could take that 20 million and you could invest in leaders, and it will produce 1,000 of some of the most highly trained, experienced leaders in organizing and strategy and campaigns and more. And absolutely, it will produce that high quality of leaders. The outcome is guaranteed. Which one would you choose? 10 million people significantly benefiting from a policy, or 1,000 highly trained leaders? I'm gonna let you sit with that. When I was thinking about this situation, if you don't mind, I'm gonna go back to my seminary days, and I was thinking about this scripture. I'm in Matthew 7, and it says, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine," Jesus is talking, and it's a metaphor that he's using. "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall, because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. When I think about this, I know that this is Jesus talking, but I'm thinking about not Jesus, but the people I believe who was made in God's image. And I, I think about this home that we have, this democracy, and I think about the harsh weather that this scripture is talking about. And I think about the forces that have defunded and contributed to a decline in unions. I think about redistricting and strict voter laws that have left people out of our democracy. I think about the hundreds of millions of dollars that go to corporate tax breaks and produce too few jobs and end up defunding too many school-age children. I think about people who come into government and wipe away policies for the people. And I think about these range of things, and I know that a house built on policies and processes is not a bad thing, but it's kind of like sinking sand. It can go away. But when I think about a house built on people, people who will care and act on immigration and housing and democracy, when I think about a house built on the people, people who will come together and produce thousands of other leaders and have a multiplier effect. When I think about a house built on people who build communities like Evan talked about, where there's an act of care, they build communities of care and collaboration instead of individualism. When I think about communities like that, and people may move, they may leave Ohio, they may leave Alabama, they may leave Arizona, but they won't leave the skills that they developed over time. When I think about a house built on that, I would make that bet all day. $20 million on 1,000 people instead of one policy that could get wiped away in a moment, because that's not sinking sand, that's a firm foundation. That's what I would want to build a house on. That's what I would want to invest $20 million in. That's something that has a multiplier effect, which is why the Progressive Multiplier Fund is having a multiplier effect. And so I think about that analogy in this question, and I think about what is our diagnosis and what do we value, which goes to what Julie was saying. And I would build a house on the power of the people all day. And that's, I think, something that we need to lift up for funders and part of the agitation I'm trying to do with other funders.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason took us to church.
Jason did take us to church. I love it. No, and we work only with groups like the ones you see on the phone, the ones that are about building people power, the ones who are organizing centric. And that presents a whole challenge around revenue generation and building those independent streams, because we have trained our country to provide help, hope, and support. We've trained our donors as a country to, give $1 to feed somebody or give $1 to cure a disease, but we have not done near what we need to do to educate about what does it mean to resource power and the agency that comes from having power. So I would love to open our question first, if the panel has questions of each other, but also we've got a handful of questions that have come through the chat and also from registration. So panelists, before we dive into our audience's questions, any lingering comments or questions you all would like to raise? Great. We'll hand it over to our audience then. I see one from Aaron Dorfman and Rick Adams in the chat. Aaron, I'm so glad you're with us today. So Aaron asks, I'm curious about how much independent revenue generation is happening. So for the average grant partner PMF, how much growth do they see in independent revenue year over year by total dollars and or percent? And how much are groups still reliant on foundation funding? Is it still 80% or more of their budgets? So I can answer this from a PMF portfolio perspective. And would love the three panelists from our movement groups to talk about where it is in, because those are three very different pictures from the three groups that are on the phone. Um,